Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for tonight's program, the second in our Death Matters series, Generational Shifts in Approaching End of Life. My name is Emily Hillwright, and I am the Director of Operations here at the Merchants House Museum, New York City's only family home to be preserved intact, both inside and out, from the 19th century. Built in 1832 by abolitionist and social reformer Joseph Brewster, and then home to the Treadwell family and their Irish servants for nearly 100 years, the Merchants House is complete with the Treadwell family's original furnishings and personal possessions. The house offers, with unparalleled authenticity, an intimate look at life in 19th century New York. After nearly 3 years of extensive research, we are proud to announce that the museum is also a recently identified site of the Underground Railroad, allowing us to share the story of the early abolition movement in New York. For the last 14 years, the museum has been fighting proposed commercial development next door that is guaranteed to cause irreparable damage to our landmark building. The city's Landmarks Preservation Commission held a hearing last month, but has so far declined to vote on the project. Before we begin tonight's presentation, during the talk, please feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions. We will have time for a few questions at the end of the evening. I am just delighted tonight to welcome our presenter, Matilda Garrido. Matilda is a certified thanatologist and holds dual master's degrees in bioethics and thanatology, the study of death, dying, and bereavement. She has worked extensively with the dying and bereaved. She volunteers at the Merchants House in various capacities, including co-hosting our Paranormal Roundtable discussion program, In the Spirit of Science. Welcome, Matilda. Nice to see you again.
Thank you so much, Emily, and thank you again for hosting this series, which seems to have broader and broader appeal, which is wonderful as we're opening up conversations around death and dying and this inevitable part of life that for far too long has been hidden in the shadows. So very appreciative of that. And even more appreciative of Virginia Chang, who is our honored guest tonight. Virginia is an end-of-life doula in New York City, and I feel like it's important to note that those of us in the field prefer end-of-life doula as opposed to death doula. We are end-of-life doulas. We work with people at end of life. Many of us do not believe that death is the end, even though end of life is end of life here. We want to leave things open. So that is the preferred term, actually, is end-of-life doula rather than death doula. And Virginia has a private practice, a vibrant private practice in New York City under the name Till the Last. And Virginia, I'm so grateful that you have agreed to spend time with us tonight and talk about many things, including generational differences at the end of life.
Oh, first of all, thank you so much, Matilda, for the invitation, as well as Emily and Pi for, hosting, offering the series, creating conversation and curiosity within the community. Because the more places that we can have conversations about death and dying and all these processes and mysteries of life, the better that we are in just keeping our minds open and willing to just accept more of the unknown. So I really appreciate this, Matilda. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Virginia.
Thank you so much for clarifying the term, because I'm actually a very strong believer in the use of end-of-life doula.
Yes.
And, I really appreciate your clarifying it for our community.
Thank you, Virginia. Yes, I agree. And I think especially now that there are more and more famous people who are eager and wanting to be trained in this work. There recently was an article about Nicole Kidman. This is all wonderful. We want more people to become aware and active, but please, the preferred term for those of us in the field is end-of-life doula rather than death doula. So if you go forth and spread the good word, please use that. So Virginia, I would love to hear from you about what brought you to this field when you started working here and the parts of your work that you find most satisfying. And then after that, I would like you to talk a little bit about your new book, which has just come out. So I'm hoping you'll share those with us.
Okay, so thank you. I think most people, most end-of-life doulas who are in the field, first of all, came to the work post-COVID. Obviously, the COVID pandemic was traumatic, but it also taught society that we're not dying well and has really
Mm,
raised the bar in terms of increasing the demand for public education and more conversation around death. So, most end-of-life doulas are here post-COVID. I was actually doing the work pre-COVID, and how I came to be an end-of-life doula pre-COVID is I actually came here out of personal trauma, which
mm.
is probably not the case for most end-of-life doulas. I would say maybe even like yourself, Matilda, you have a familiarity with the subject. You feel comfortable with it, and you realize I would like to share that comfort in talking about a difficult subject with other people.
Well, it's interesting, Virginia, because I actually came to the work because of my positive end of life experience with my parents. And I have found, as you have, people come to this work either because they had a very positive experience and they want to make that more available, or because they had a very negative experience and they want to change the face of that for others.
Yeah, so I am coming from, so great. So Matilda and I represent the two ends of the spectrum. So I had a very negative experience.
Mm,
I will say that I was probably like the average person, which is I really never thought about death and dying for all of my life. And I actually had very little exposure to death and dying all of my life. I had no grandparents close to die. I had no peers die when I was young. I didn't really know anyone close that died. I really went through my whole life really with no exposure to it. And I used to think, oh, I was lucky. It was just something that was completely just not really in my mind.
mm,
And then I got to my mid 50s and I had three close people die to me. My father died in September of 2016. Then my mother-in-law, who I was actually quite close to, died in January. And then my own mother died in April. I
mm,
had three deaths of people in 7 months. And it was back to back to back. And it was really my first intimate exposure to death. And it was overwhelming. It was numbing. I was grief-stricken. And I honestly didn't know what to do. I didn't know what the experience would be like or should be like. I didn't know what I was allowed to do. And
mm,
I have to share with you that some of the deaths did not go well in
mm.
terms of the medical establishment did not honor families' wishes, and
Oh,
then
that's terrible.
they did horrific things to the bodies of our loved ones in an effort to save lives. And then you're like left with the damaged bodies and you're told to move on.
Hmm. Very
And
upsetting. Very upsetting.
right. And I don't say this because their efforts didn't work. I say this because they left us with trauma. They left us with they left us disregarding how we thought about our loved ones and thought they were doing what they should as the medical establishment, as if they knew better. And I
Hmm.
have always been left with the wonder about whether my loved ones, as they were dying, did they know that this was happening to them? Because I can tell you for in every single incident, this is not what they would have wanted.
Right.
And so I just don't know, right? You just don't know how much consciousness they had in the last moments, hours. Were they aware that these things were happening to them? Um, and then, of course, they died. And
Mm,
then you're left with all this horrible memories of how they died. You're left with the horrible experience. You're left with so many questions about, you know, did you do the best? Did you do the
right.
right thing? Could I have done more? Why didn't I know more? Right? And
Yeah, I know. I just want to interject briefly that when we deal with people in grief, those unresolved questions weigh very heavily and can really, really, really impact the grief trajectory in a negative way.
absolutely. I mean, I'm guaranteed you're talking about 3 deaths within 7 months, trauma from the way we were treated, horrible memories about the way they died, someone who had no coping skills, um, was totally numb and bereft. I was on the trajectory for complicated, prolonged grief, guaranteed.
Hmm.
And I actually had no support within my close family, extended family, or community. I felt very, very much alone. And I mean, and I didn't even know whether what I couldn't even name it as grief. Honestly, I couldn't even name what I was feeling and going through as grief. I just was a zombie.
Yeah, it's extremely powerful that that pivoted you closer towards the experience of death because it would seem so natural and understandable for someone who had been through three traumatic experiences like that in such a close time frame to just kind of say, well, I'm going to move as far away from this as I possibly can.
So, yeah, so I'll tell you how I ended up. I have to say that I feel like I was very, very lucky that
Mm,
I am where I am today. Um, I ended up, because of my ill state of coping, I was escaping the world. So I was meditating at a spiritual center near my home, just to like, literally, I didn't know how to function in the world anymore. And there happened to be a flyer on the bulletin board one day in June. So my mother died in April and it was only in June. So I was really pretty lucky. I only had about 2 months of really complicated grief. And on the flyer, it said a monk of the spiritual center and Henry Fusco Weiss. And so Henry
mhm.
Fusco Weiss was the original founder of ANELDA, which is the first private organization that created the first end-of-life doula program in the country in
Yes.
2015. So Henry and a monk of the center was giving a talk entitled Why Death Matters. And I thought, oh, I want to know that. I want to know why death matters. So I went to the talk, and I can honestly tell you, I don't remember what they talked about, why death matters, but I remember Henry talking about end of life doulas,
Mhm.
non-medical people who companion, educate, support, guide people in the transitions, in the dying process. And I just thought, why wasn't there someone like that there for me?
Mm.
Right? I could have used someone to educate, inform, companion me, help me to advocate for my loved ones, or even just to tell me that what I was feeling was normal or okay, that eventually I was going to be all right.
Mhm.
And I just thought, so that began my journey. I contacted Henry and I started a conversation with him. And that opened my whole curiosity to wanting to learn about death and dying from a very objective perspective. Like,
Mhm.
is this the way we're supposed to die in America? Is this what death is like? Is this the way people have always died? Is this a common experience? Right. So then I
Mm.
sort of like the scientist side of me kicked in and I was like, I want to understand this. Like, is my experience so unusual? And what it turns out is it's not so unusual. My experience is so common, and that even makes
Yes.
it more of a tragedy.
Sadly, yes. Yes. I agree with you. I think more often than not, people are confused. They feel unsupported. They feel unheard. I think the medical profession themselves are very frustrated. I mean, when I was in my bioethics master's program, half of the other students were doctors who said, I can't function in this realm without learning a more human approach to treating people. right? Like they have a mandate from insurance companies and from whatever medical facility that they're working with, but they are not taught about how to
Right.
really relate to people around difficult matters.
I'll just tell one quick anecdote and then I'll continue with my story. So I
Yeah.
actually give a talk annually at Emory Medical School
Hmm.
to second year medical students. So I've been doing this now for a few years. So medical students at Emory University go to medical school for 4 years, every week out of 4 years, and only 1 week is devoted to aging and dying. That's in the second year. And I talked to the second year students during that 1 week. And it's shocking that the things that I share with them about bringing a more human approach, a more human thinking to dying is so radical. And they say to me that they're in medical school and they've never heard anything like what I'm talking about.
And that just increases their fear about dealing with patients and families,
Yes.
right? Because they don't feel equipped. So when they walk into the rooms, their feeling ill at ease is immediately communicated nonverbally to the
Absolutely.
family, to the patient. And then that sets up this really unfortunate dynamic that I think without the intervention of um, perhaps a sensitive hospice provider, if they are called in and the family's open, or if it's even suggested. I mean, sometimes it's not even suggested because the medical staff feels like the family's not open to it. They're afraid to raise the discussion, they're afraid to raise the question. But yes,
Right.
it's a real problem.
It's a real problem. So going back to my story, you know, so then I decided at that point, like, this is the silver lining that could come out of my
Mm,
trauma, is that I can't change what had happened to my loved ones, but I could make the process smoother, less traumatic, and maybe even positive for other people. And
mhm,
so I sort of started on that path to become an end of life doula, and I've just continually took the next step in front of me. And now pretty much I do this full time.
mm,
And it has showed me that death is an incredible event. It can be beautiful and reverent, and it can be full of the wonder and mystery of life and death. And it's such a personal thing, too. And that
mhm.
it is as unique as every individual, and how you live will be reflected exactly in how you die. Yeah, it's been
Yeah.
amazing.
And a lot of the work too, and I know that you do this, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about this, and this sort of goes into intergenerational dynamics and stuff, which we'll get into later. But a lot of it is supporting family members so that they feel as if they're making a difference for the person,
Oh,
right? Because it is such a feeling of disempowerment, I think.
yes. Yes. And actually, now having shared with you my personal story, that is really the strong motivation for what drives me in the work. Is
Mm,
it's not, I remember so clearly how helpless and powerless I felt watching my loved ones die in these institutions being ignored.
yeah.
So what drives me now is to empower the dying and their family members to speak up for what they want and what is best for them,
Hmm.
right? Because what is best for you as an individual or as a family may clearly not be what the medical people might be recommending or pushing for. And so
Hmm.
empowerment is a strong ethos of my practice. And so going back to your question about like, um, what's the thing that really gets me excited about doing this work is that when I'm working with a family or a dying person, and usually they call me because they can see that the death that's coming for them is not good,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're usually calling you because they're afraid of what they see coming, and they know that they want something different, maybe
Yeah.
hopefully better. They don't know how to get it. They don't know how to
Mm-hmm.
bring it about themselves. So they ask for help, which is great. So the best thing for me is when you come into a family like this and they're like lost, they're confused, they're afraid, but they are open.
Mm-hmm.
And the most exciting part is when you work with them and you can finally see that they've got it. Like they're going to be okay. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm like, the best thing is what I say to the family, I was like, you don't need me at the death. You've got this.
Mm.
Because it's so important for the family members to bring about the good death for their loved one. It's not
Yes.
my loved one, it's
Hmm.
their loved one. And so if you empower the family to bring about that good death to their loved one, that will help them with their grief afterwards. Coping.
100%, Virginia. I mean, 100%. I work with people in my groups and I have people on both sides of that spectrum, right? Like I have people who feel like they did everything. They honored their loved ones' wishes. They were participatory. They were advocates, and their grief is very, very, very different from people who felt powerless, ineffective, were left with lots of questions. Should I have done this? Should I have done that? Yes, empowering the family has really lasting effects.
Lasting effects. It's not just lasting, but it's also a ripple effect because
Yeah.
that family member then thinks about what do I want for my own death? What do I want
Mm,
for the death of loved ones around me? And then they begin to have a different relationship with death and want something different for themselves. So you
hmm.
already planted the seeds for a different viewpoint about death into the next generation.
Yes. I want to talk so much more about this, but first, please tell us about your book because you have a book that came out. Was it last month that came out? And of course, people will have heard of the Dummies series. So, and end of life planning is very mysterious, and this will be so helpful. So, please tell us more about
So
it.
thank you so much for allowing me to
Hmm.
go this way. This is my new book, Preparing for End of Life for Dummies. So this book came out just at the end of February. It's literally hot off the presses. Um, so the publisher actually came to me and asked me to write this book, which I'm
Hmm.
really privileged. I understand that that's a very unusual situation, but I have to
Yeah.
say I'm very privileged. Um, Initially, I didn't want to write it.
Oh, really? How come?
Um, I was actually finishing up my first book. I have so my first book will come out second, so I have
Oh.
another second book that will be coming out next year with
Hmm.
Simon and Schuster,
Oh,
also
very
End
nice.
of Life. So I was actually finishing up that first book when John Wiley and Sons came to me and asked me if I would write this For Dummies book. And I was like, oh, no, I can't write another book. And I was like, I don't have anything more to say. I've already like written all my stories and all my thoughts about dying in this other book. But they really persisted and they just kept in conversation with me. And they really actually supported me as I came out of this other writing experience, kind of like drained and tired. And they really
Mm.
supported me and really stayed with me. And we kept in conversation. And eventually I was like, I thought a lot about it. And what I really came to realize is that, so For Dummies is a brand, right? It's
Right.
a
Yes.
brand book. And what is the For Dummies brand book? It's a book that's extremely accessible. It reaches a wide number of people.
Hmm.
It's simple, it's easy to read, and it presents complicated, difficult subjects in a very accessible, easy to read language. So I
Yeah.
get to train for a month to learn to write in what's called the Dummies voice. So if you get the book and you read it, it is my ideas, it's my thoughts, it is my style of voice, but it's all in what's the Dummies voice, which is
Right.
so that there is consistency across the brand. So that you
Hmm.
want to learn about tax accounting, or you want to learn about French cooking, or you want to learn about how to prepare for end of life, you know what to expect. You know that you'll be able to understand and comprehend the material, and it'll be presented in a way that you'll get it. So I actually had to be trained to learn to write in the Dummy's voice. But what I was really excited about was that I believe that there are a lot of people out there who don't know that there's a different option for end of life, that there's a different
Hmm.
way to think about death. And unfortunately, we've been conditioned by society for like the last 150 years to be really afraid and scared of what death means. And what I realized was if I wrote the Dummies book, this would be a way for me to share information with a huge sector of the population that I wouldn't normally be able to have access to.
Yes. I mean, the Dummies books are really popular. When I was getting my first master's, I bought psychological research for dummies when I was in a psych research class because I felt like I really needed that very kind of like plain breakdown of a subject that felt vast and intimidating to me.
Right.
And I think end of life planning feels very amorphous, very intimidating, even things where there are kind of sort of step by step things that you can do that, an attorney might walk you through. It's a lot of it is the concepts are much more global because they're really about your values and about your choice. And the idea of being able to being able to discern and identify your values and what you want and translate that into concrete steps that will help you and your family achieve that outcome to the best
Right.
of our ability, right? I mean, there's always a wrench. The best laid plans during COVID, unfortunately, went out the window. But yeah, I think that this really resonates for people around end of life because it is so overwhelming and can feel so confusing.
Yeah, I mean, so the book allowed me to really consolidate my ideas and really define what I would say is kind of a new approach
Mhm.
preparing for end of life. It's a very whole person approach. It's very holistic, and it really breaks it down into sort of what I would say the all dimensions of being, which is how we've
Mhm.
approached other aspects of the dying experience. So why not at preparing for end of life? We should look at it multidimensional as well.
Mhm.
And so that's the way I've broken down the book. And it's been great. I've learned a lot as well. And it was a um and it also really I grew a lot as a writer, as an author.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
it was really exciting.
Yeah, and I wonder, like, I mean, I do not a book, but I do writing for the NFDA about things like funeral planning and stuff like that. And as I'm writing, it's helping me with my own
Correct.
planning and my own discernment
Correct.
process.
Correct. Correct. Yeah, and
Hmm.
like the Dummies series, it's like for instance, it's in libraries, right?
Yeah.
It's a huge, huge resource book in libraries. And that just makes me really excited that like this is a book that's going to be in libraries that, people in community rural areas, disadvantaged communities that really rely upon local resources that go from hand to hand,
Hmm.
that, my book might be in there. And
Yeah, very accessible, right? Very accessible, very recognizable. People trust the Dummies brand. And so they're going to trust, I mean, they ought to trust the advice that you're giving, even if it wasn't under the Dummies brand. But that the fact that they're coupled together makes it really accessible, really available to people who might not otherwise consider reading about this.
correct. Absolutely. And I'll tell you, everybody, it's funny too. I didn't know I
Hmm.
could be humorous, but I can. And I also got an illustration team dedicated to the book, and they're cartoons and they're really funny illustrations. And, I decided that I didn't want people to feel like preparing for end of life was heavy and sad. So it's very upbeat, it's very light.
Hmm.
And it kind of mirrors my views about what end of life is, which is I don't think of it that way. I really think of it as a celebratory event that we should use to honor the culmination of somebody's life. And
Yeah.
that's a huge thing, right?
It's so interesting. There, a line, something that Prince Harry said once has always stuck to me about Queen Elizabeth. And he was asked in an interview after Queen Elizabeth died, and the interviewee, I forget who it was, said, "Did you feel sad?" And he said, "Of course, I felt sad for me, but I didn't feel sad for her because she had completed her life." And I just thought that that was such a beautiful way to phrase it. And for me personally, an aspiration, I want to complete my life. I don't want there to be stray leftovers that other people have questions about or that they have to deal with or clean up after me. Like, I want people to be able to feel that I've felt good about my life,
That's
you
right.
know? And even though it's always sad to leave people behind, but that I was okay. I didn't have regrets.
Right. Absolutely. That's
Yeah. So, Virginia, I'm very interested. As I mentioned, I think a lot of our audience has seen the movie The Farewell and these kind of intergenerational differences around um, death and dying and what happens around death and dying and choices people make and choices the people surrounding those people make. And I wonder if you can speak a little bit to your experience navigating those dynamics with families, because as we know, it can become a pain point,
really.
unfortunately, really easily, especially if open conversations have not been had in advance.
So I will say that the Farewell movie was actually very accurate. I thought
Mm,
that at the time, but in anticipation of this webinar, I went back to rewatch it and I was like, yep, that's still pretty accurate.
hmm.
Um, but I would say that it's not so that while we may phrase it as generational issues, I would say more so, it's really cultural issues. It's
Okay.
really more of a question of East versus West. And it
Hmm.
just turns out that the West view, the Western view is the young generation, and the, Eastern view is represented by the older generation. Because if you really think about it, it's not so much generational in that there's that one scene where um, they're in the hospital and that young Chinese doctor comes in
Yes.
and all that family is around there. And Aquafina starts talking to the doctor in English, and the grandmother's like, doesn't know what's going on.
Hmm.
And Aquafina is asking the doctor, like, are you okay with this? How can you be okay with lying to her? Now you can see clearly they're of the same generation, but
Right.
clearly he's serving a population in China, and he needs to be dealing with it according to the culture of the people that he's serving.
And this is really interesting, Virginia. This is what I also rewatched it, and this is what I was thinking. Even though it seems like the grandmother was in the dark, in actuality, I don't know that she was, because she would have been complicit to many of these situations
Yeah.
in her life previously,
Yes.
right? So, like, I would imagine that on some level, she knew I may not always be getting the whole truth about what's going on with me.
Absolutely. I mean, it's clear that she knew.
Let's
I think
let's just,
what
for people that haven't seen it, it's just to let's you and I just like recap that, and maybe you can talk about to these traditions in China that they have around discussing bad medical news.
But I do think it's really more of a case that there's a real trust between the older generation and the younger generation. That
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like this idea of a passing of the mantle, right? Um, that grandmother was no longer going to be the matriarch of the family, and she was kind of like prepared to pass the mantle on to the next generation, right? There's a
Mm-hmm.
real sense of like familial trust that
Mm.
exists. And so in that respect, it is generational, but there were many issues that were cultural. And so sometimes there's a lot of that confusion. But
Yeah. In China, when people have a terminal condition, they actually are not informed. The family is informed, but the patient is not informed. Is that
I
typically
think it's
how it works?
okay. I will share. I was thinking about this, but I will share with you a personal story because this came up. This actually happened to me, and I
Hmm.
thought about this again as I watched the farewell show. I'm the farewell movie. So, my father was born in mainland China, and he had a brother, but the brother died young. So my father basically was raised as an only son. His father ended up dying when he was a child, so his mother remarried.
Hmm.
So my father had a half sister that he was very close to, and then ended up, you know, living his life with, right? So my father came to America, as a young man, got married, had me, raised his family. And now my father's he was a very prominent businessman in New York City, Chinatown.
Hmm.
Okay. So now my father's, and he, at some point, uh, probably, I mean, early, like in the 1960s, his half sister had come to New York City and ended up living also nearby. So my father had his half sister nearby. She was married. They had children. I had cousins. Okay. So uh, when my when my father's half sister's husband, so my father and my half sister had been many decades together, right? When he was about in his 80s, um, his half sisters, so I guess it would be like a brother-in-law, died. And my father took it really, really bad. Like, I mean, almost like got sick, like with the grief of
Mm.
losing him, right? And just maybe it reminded him of his mortality, and then maybe he was next because they were all the same age, and it really just made my father really quite upset. Okay. Now jump forward about 8, 10 years. My sister is going to, oh, okay. So his half sister ended up getting very sick, and since her husband had died, she ended up immigrating to the UK where her daughter was living,
Hmm.
so that her daughter could take care of her. Then my sister goes to London, and she's like, "Oh, I'm going to go visit Auntie Agnes." And we're like, "Okay, great. Go visit Auntie Agnes." She goes to London. She finds our cousin, and the cousin tells her that Auntie Agnes is not alive, that Auntie Agnes died like 5 years ago. And we're like,
Oh my God.
"What? And you never told us? You never told my father that his sister had died?" And they said, well, they said, "Well, your father took the news so bad when our father died that we were afraid that if we told him that his sister had died, that we didn't want to be responsible for, like, maybe he would then react so badly."
Uh-huh.
So they never told him. And in fact, they had written letters to my father like in her name and sent cards in her name.
Oh my goodness.
So then I were like, we have to tell my father. Okay, so now I'm the only daughter living near my parents. So they said, Virginia, you have to go and tell our dad that his sister has died. Okay, so I have to go. So I go to my parents' home and I tell him that his sister had died, and he didn't believe me. He didn't believe me. He was so angry. He didn't believe me. He was like, why would you say such a horrible thing? And he's
So
like,
he was angry at you for saying it, not that it might have been hidden from him.
yes, no, but he didn't believe that his sister had died. He didn't believe that they would do that.
So that's not a common cultural practice then. It was
That,
just a
that
decision that they
no, but
made.
this is very right. This is to reinforce the
Oh,
Eastern thing of not
uh,
sharing the bad news, right?
right,
They didn't want
right.
to tell my father that his sister had died because they didn't want to share the bad news
Yes.
to protect him, to because they were afraid of his health issues and how he might react because he had gotten so sick when the father had died.
Is this why
I called my
the
cousin and I said, you need to call my father and tell him that your mother died.
is this why they don't share the news of terminal illness with people
It's
who
because they're
are,
worried that you'll even get more sick
yeah, and
from
it's
the news.
considered compassionate. It's considered compassionate rather than
Yes,
deceptive.
yes, they like exactly. Because when I talked about it with my cousins, and my cousins are my generation, but they completely viewed it from an Eastern perspective, and I
Interesting.
completely viewed it from a Western perspective.
Hmm.
Right? They didn't feel it was deception. They felt they were doing the compassionate thing for my father not to share news that his sister had died.
That's
But
so interesting.
I was confounded. And then I was like, how long did you expect to keep this going?
Probably they thought that they could keep it going until he
He
himself
died.
passed away, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's true, Virginia. I mean, in this country, we're such, I mean, I have a lot of family from England and I have a lot of friends in England, and they're like, you guys are such blabbermouths. You just like talk about things endlessly and you talk about these highly personal things, and everybody in America is in therapy, whereas therapy, I mean, it's becoming more common in the UK now, but the idea of talking about your feelings is actually this comes into a cultural versus generational thing with my older relatives. you know yeah, we would not really, I mean, people knew that someone was ill, but I would see very ill older people get on the phone and pretend that they were feeling well when I knew that it was a real struggle for them to kind of get through the day.
Yes. Yes.
So,
So I'll
how do
tell you
you navigate that when you work with a family?
So I'll tell you the one interest. So I'll tell you one of the most complicated cases I ever had that
Please.
had cultural and generational issues. So I supported an Asian family where the grandmother, who was the matriarch of the family, was dying. And but I actually did not support the grandmother at all. In this case, it was the family felt the grave responsibility to be the caregivers and the caretakers.
Mm,
But they realized that they couldn't do it completely Eastern, that they were, Chinese American, they were in this society, and it was a generational support. And they wanted to do it in a way that was recognized everybody's um, relationship to the grandmother and how
mm,
they could grieve and support. So I ended up supporting the 10 extended family members, and this was small, 10 family members who were direct uh, supporters of the grandmother. There were three of her children, and then um, three of her children, one daughter-in-law. So there were four of that next generation. The grandmothers alone, 4 in the next generation, and then 6 grandchildren. I
Mm,
ended up supporting the 10 children and grandchildren, each individually, as well as we would have family meetings once a month, and we would also have caregiver meetings, which were comprised of the 5 main women caregivers of the grandmother, which were 2 of the daughters and 3 of the granddaughters.
hmm.
And I can tell you, it was just it was tricky. I mean, first of all, we're talking 10 individual people. Some of them were married to Westerners. Some were, born in America but Chinese American. Some of them were had come over when they were children. That was like the second generation. I mean, it was just each, and depending on how acculturated each person was to American lifestyle, really informed how they viewed what was happening to the matriarch.
Yeah.
I mean, it was challenging.
I bet it was. I bet it was. And did you work with her too? Was she
I
involved in
never,
this or solely with the
I,
family?
I never worked with the grandmother directly. It was all about how could the family best support the grandmother within a Western culture,
Uh-huh.
and me understanding Asian culture, Chinese culture, and also the generations and the cultural differences. How could I empower them to best support the grandmother in a way that honored everybody's relationships and experiences with the grandmother?
Yeah.
Because
That's
they realized,
beautiful.
right, because they realized they couldn't do it all Chinese, but they couldn't do it all Western,
Hmm.
right? But how could they honor everybody's perspective coming into this?
Yeah. So this brings up something else that's interesting, Virginia, is that um, end of life doulas sometimes never work with the dying person. Sometimes a family will hire an end of life doula, and and as we know, it's never ethical to take on a case where a family member comes to you and says, "My mother really needs an end of life doula. Can we work you into this scenario?" And appropriately, the answer is no, I can work with you, but I can only work with a dying person if they generate the
Absolutely.
request.
Oh, I'll just tell you a nice finish off to that complicated story with the
Yes.
3 generations, the 11 of them. Um, most of the One of the big reasons why I was brought in was one of the granddaughters. There was one granddaughter who was particularly the closest to the grandmother, right? Very, very close, maybe even closer than the daughters of the grandmother, right? Because when mother-daughter is a little complicated, but as we know, grandmother-granddaughter can be a very special relationship. So they were
Yeah.
very, very worried about how this granddaughter was going to handle, an adult granddaughter was going to handle the death. So I worked with her a lot. And, she's obviously now 3rd generation. She's raised here in America, Western, but she has a very strong cultural identity. She was the most afraid and most emotional person, one of them when I first met her. But at the end, she became the rock for her family.
Mm.
Everybody turned to her for help and guidance. And she was the one who really guided her family in the end at the moment of her grandmother's death. She ended up going on to do end of life doula training and becoming an end of life doula herself.
That's wonderful. And I bet she was able to do that because in working with you, she was able to process her feelings as she was moving through it, right? Rather than letting things build up and not having an outlet to talk about things that are going on or ask questions or things like that. And if there is one thing that I could stress to our audience, it's that. If you are a family member of someone who you feel is maybe not dying well and that person is not open to doing things differently or working with an end of life doula, you can work with an end of life doula. You
Right.
can help yourself through the experience so
Yeah.
that you can feel that you have done the best that you can, and that absolutely will move forward with you as you experience your grief, because in working with the grieving, nothing is worse. Nothing is worse than having regrets and questions about whether you could have done something to mitigate the dying person's suffering or your own suffering around them as they passed away.
Thank you for that wisdom. What Matilda says is absolutely true.
Hmm.
Absolutely true. It takes a lot of personal work to get to a place of feeling okay that you did your best and that there is nothing you can do anymore to change the situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially if you are not in alignment or with the dying person and their philosophy. And we must remember people get to die on their own terms. I mean, we can have a lot of opinions about how people should do their dying differently or whatever, but these are the last choices people get to make. And if they want to go into the experience in denial, this is their choice, right? But we can help and be available to people who want to do things a little bit differently, or experience things themselves a little bit differently as they're surrounding someone else who's making their own choices.
Wow, Matilda, time just flew.
I know,
There's
Virginia.
so much more we could talk about.
I know, always. It's so ripe for discussion. And Emily's come in, and we have a question in the Q&A. But first, before we talk about that and finish up, I want people to know how they can learn more about you and your practice and get in touch with you.
Oh, maybe I will drop can, can you drop just my website in the chat, maybe?
Yeah, Emily, can you open up the chat so people can?
Or
Yes. So
I,
if you just punch it in the chat there, there's a drop down to say to send to everyone, and that way everyone who is tuned in today will get that link in the chat.
Okay, I'm only seeing host and panelists on the chat, but maybe
Just
I'm not
send it
looking
to
in the
me
right
and I
place.
can send along. Um,
Okay.
I before we turn to our Q&A, if anybody has any questions, please do pop them in the Q&A feature there at the bottom of your screen. But before we get to the question that's been asked, I'm going to use my privilege here to butt in and ask my own question. As the two of you were talking in Virginia, as you were talking a lot about sort of the generational and cultural aspects of this, and I was wondering whether you've seen sort of a generational or cultural divide in who seeks out the services of an end of life doula, and whether you've seen a change in that over your years of practice or not.
I would say in most immigrant families or families that have strong cultural frameworks, it's usually the children, the adult children who reach out for help. I'll make a quick reference. This is really interesting. The adult children call because, from their Western perspective, their parents are just not handling it well,
Mhm.
right? And then I'm like, okay, well, get your parents on board and then I'll work with them. So they get their parents to kind of agree to speak with me. And oftentimes I'll then work with the parents. And it turns out actually that they're oftentimes okay, that they're actually in a pretty good place, but they're using their cultural generational framework in order to handle it, which is not consistent with the
Mm.
Western younger generational perspective on death and dying. And then I'm like, you've got to communicate this to your children so that they understand that you're okay. And
Mm.
that's where the gap is the older generation can't talk to the younger generation. And oftentimes, if they try to talk, the younger generation don't know how to hear it,
Mm.
right? So then sometimes I have to go back to the younger generation. And I'm like, your parents okay. The problem is actually with you guys that that you can't accept that your parents want it this way. I don't say it like that, right? I don't obviously say it like that. But then I'm like, would you like me to work with you? And sometimes the younger generation is like open to it, but sometimes they're really offended that, quote, the communication problem is with them. They
Mm,
can't reach, there's that gap with understanding their parents' experience.
yeah.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting.
It is interesting. Thanks so much for sharing. We'll turn to the Q&A here. Somebody wants to know if you have any advice for people dealing with a terminal diagnosis with very little time to say goodbye.
Um, it's never too little time. There's always enough time. It depends. It depends what you want to do and what saying goodbye means to you. But there's never too little time.
That's such an interesting perspective because it doesn't have to be complicated,
That's right.
right? Yeah, we may feel like, oh my God, I've got so much to resolve, so much to discuss with this person. But um, I don't know if you found this, Virginia. I have found this generally. People at the end of life have a lot of clarity, and they're ready to cut through all the bullshit, right?
Right. I mean, honestly, as time gets narrower and shorter, they are willing to let go of more of the bullshit and really get to the essence of, what do I need to say? What will bring me closure? What will give me peace? Right.
Yeah. Virginia, thank you again so much. This has been great. This has been wonderful. And for everybody who was here with us tonight, this will be up on the Merchants House YouTube channel tomorrow. Please feel free to send it to your friends, distribute the link. It's just been a really wonderful conversation and of such great service to everyone, I think. And we're so grateful, Virginia. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and we just really are grateful to have you here and to share your expertise and your experience.
Thank you to the Merchant House. Thank you for all the participants who are here, and thank you for your curiosity. Please keep talking in your communities, among your friends and families. There are people who want to talk about it. Just be brave. Be brave. Just start the conversation yourself.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Before we say goodbye, I just have a few closing remarks here. As many of you know, the museum is currently in the midst of a long-awaited year-long exterior restoration project, which means that we are currently hidden by scaffolding, but we are still open to the public with guided house tours and special themed tours and exciting new exhibitions. We are open to visitors on Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, and we have options for both guided and self-guided tours, so please do come and visit us. And stay in touch. You can follow us on social media and share our posts to tell your friends and family all about us. Tonight's program, like all of our virtual programming was presented free of charge and will be posted, as Matilda said, on our YouTube page. We do hope that you will consider making a donation to the Merchants House or joining us as a member, especially as we continue our now 14-year battle to protect our house from damage from proposed development next door. You can donate online or join us at merchantshouse.org/support. So thank you yet again to everyone for joining us. Thank you so much, Virginia and Matilda, for being here. And have a wonderful night, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Virginia.
Thank you, Matilda. Emily, bye.